The Montana cold is patient. But tonight, the coldest thing wasn't the blizzard screaming at -30 degrees. It was the fading hum of my father's Range Rover leaving me in the pitch-black pines. They timed it perfectly, abandoning me at 11 at night on the exact day I turned 18. I thought it was punishment until a homeless woman dragged me into the bushes and whispered, "Quiet. If you walk that road, only a staged accident awaits you." My name is Pauline Marchant, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the heiress to a mining fortune that stretched back 3 generations. Now, standing on the shoulder of a desolate logging road while the red taillights of my father's Range Rover dissolved into the swirling white nothingness, I was just prey. The Montana winter does not care about your bank account. It does not care that it is your 18th birthday. It only cares about how fast it can turn your blood into ice. And out here, 5 miles from the nearest paved road, the answer was probably less than an hour. The silence that followed the engine's departure was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against my eardrums. The only sound was the wind, a low, moaning beast threading its way through the black pine trees that lined the road like prison bars. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing Italian leather boots, the kind meant for walking from a chauffeured car to a boutique entrance, not for trekking through 2 feet of fresh powder. My coat was cashmere, elegant and expensive, and utterly useless against a wind chill that was currently dropping toward 30 below zero. I reached into my pocket, my fingers already feeling stiff and clumsy. I had $500 in cash, my severance package, as my stepmother, Valerie, had implied without actually saying the words, $500. That was the price of my father's conscience. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream, because screaming would waste oxygen and heat. The memory of the last hour played out behind my eyelids like a fever dream. The drive had been quiet, oppressively quiet. The heater in the Rover had been set to 72 degrees, a tropical paradise compared to this hell. Valerie had done all the talking, her voice dripping with that saccharine, manufactured concern she perfected for charity galas. "It is for your own good, Pauline," she had said, not looking at me, but checking her reflection in the vanity mirror. "You are out of control. We have tried therapy. We have tried boarding school. You need a reality check. You need to learn what the real world feels like without a safety net." Out of control. That was their narrative. Because I asked questions about the trust fund my grandfather left me, because I refused to smile for the Christmas card photos while she wore my late mother's emeralds. I had looked at my father. Arthur. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "Dad," I had whispered, "you're seriously doing this tonight." He didn't turn. He couldn't. If he looked at me, the facade would crack, and he would have to admit that he wasn't teaching his daughter a lesson. He was disposing of an obstacle to keep his wife happy. "It is just for a while, Pauline," he had muttered, his voice weak, hollowed out by years of capitulation. "Just until you learn to appreciate what you have. There is a motel in town. You have legs. Walk. Walk." I opened my eyes. The snow was falling harder now. Thick flakes the size of quarters that stuck to my eyelashes. The darkness was total, save for the faint, gray luminescence of the snow itself. The town of Silver Creek was 5 miles south. In this weather, on these roads, walking 5 miles was a death sentence. I would freeze before I made it to the highway. But I knew these woods. I grew up in the shadow of these mountains before Valerie turned our home into a sterile museum. There was another option, the old ranger station. It was an abandoned outpost about 2 miles north, up a fire trail that branched off the main logging road. I used to hide there when I was 12. Back when my mother was first getting sick and the house became too quiet. It had a stone fireplace and 4 solid walls. It would be cold, but it would be out of the wind. If I could get inside, I could gather deadwood. I could build a fire. I could survive the night. I turned my back on the direction of town and began to trudge north. The first mile was agony. The snow was deceptive. It looked soft, But underneath the fresh powder was a crust of old ice that shattered under my weight, scraping my shins raw through my jeans. The wind was a physical assault, slapping my face with invisible hands. I wrapped my arms around myself, tucking my chin into my scarf, trying to recycle my own body heat. One step, then another. "Happy birthday, Pauline," I whispered to the trees. My voice sounded small, swallowed instantly by the storm. By the time I found the turnoff for the fire trail, I could no longer feel my toes. It wasn't a numbness that came on gradually. It was a sudden absence of sensation. As if my feet had simply ceased to exist below the ankles, I stumbled, falling onto my hands and knees. The snow felt shockingly warm against my skin. That was the danger. I knew that. I had grown up in Montana. We were taught about hypothermia in grade school. The brain starts to trick you. It tells you that you are warm when you are dying. It tells you to sleep. I forced myself up. "Get to the station. Just get to the station." The trees seemed to be closing in, their branches heavy with snow, bowing down like hooded monks watching a funeral procession. My vision began to blur at the edges. I started to see flashes of color that weren't there. Orange light, the flicker of a hearth. I saw my grandfather sitting in his leather armchair, holding a tumbler of scotch. "Come in, Pauline." His voice echoed in my head, clear as a bell. "It's warm by the fire." "Grandpa," I mumbled, my jaw slurring the words. My teeth had stopped chattering. That was bad. I knew that was bad. But the image was so inviting. I could see the station just ahead, a dark silhouette against the gray swirl. It looked welcoming. It looked like salvation. I just needed to lie down for a minute, just a quick rest before the final push. The snowbank looked like a feather bed. Soft, white, perfect. I swayed, my knees buckling, the world tilted on its axis. Suddenly, something hard and rough slammed into my shoulder. I didn't fall into the soft snow. I was yanked back, violently, the collar of my coat tightening around my throat, choking off my breath. I gasped, the cold air burning my lungs, and the hallucination of my grandfather shattered into a million freezing shards. "Wake up!" The voice was harsh, gravelly, like stones grinding together. I flailed, panic surging through the lethargy. A hand clamped over my mouth, a hand that felt like leather, calloused and smelling of motor oil and stale tobacco. I was dragged backward, away from the trail, into the dense brush of a spruce thicket. "Quiet," the voice hissed right in my ear. "Stop fighting me, little girl, or you are going to get us both killed." I froze. The adrenaline spiked through my system, momentarily clearing the fog of hypothermia. I twisted my head to look at my captor. It was a woman, or at least, a figure buried under so many layers of mismatched clothing that she looked more like a pile of rags than a human being. She wore a stained Carhartt jacket that was 3 sizes too big, patches of duct tape holding the sleeves together. Her face was wrapped in a wool scarf, leaving only her eyes visible. They were intense eyes, clear, sharp, and terrifyingly alert. They weren't the eyes of a madwoman. They were the eyes of a soldier in a trench. "Let me go," I managed to croak, though my voice was barely a whisper. "I need to get to the station." The woman didn't let go. Instead, she tightened her grip, pulling me down behind the trunk of a massive fallen tree. We were hidden from the road, buried in the shadows. "You are not going to that station," she said, her voice low and commanding. She pulled down her scarf, revealing a face weathered by wind and sun, with deep lines etched around a mouth that looked like it hadn't smiled in a decade. "Unless you want to end up with a broken neck." "My family," I started to say, confusion washing over me again. "They just left me. I have nowhere else." "I know they left you," she snapped. "I saw the Rover. A fancy car like that stands out. I saw them dump you like a bag of trash." She pointed a gloved finger toward the dark outline of the ranger station, barely visible through the trees, about 300 yards away. "You think that is a shelter?" she asked. "It is a tomb." "You're crazy," I shivered, the cold reclaiming my body, now that the adrenaline was fading. "It's a building. It has a fireplace." The woman grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at her. Her hands were rough, her fingernails cracked and dark with grime, but her touch was surprisingly steady. "Listen to me closely," she said, enunciating every word. "I live in a van down in the gully. I have been parked there for 3 days waiting for a part, 2 hours ago, before your daddy dropped you off. Another car came up this road, a black SUV, flashy rims." My heart skipped a beat. A black SUV. "A guy got out," she continued. "Young, arrogant walk. Expensive jacket. He went into that station carrying a toolbox and 2 5-gallon jugs of water." I stopped breathing. The description was vague, but I knew that walk. I knew that car. "Julian," I whispered. The name felt foreign on my tongue in this frozen nightmare. Julian was Valerie's son. My stepbrother. He was supposed to be at university in California. "I don't know his name," the woman said, her eyes narrowing. "But I know what he did. He spent 40 minutes in there. He didn't build a fire. He was banging on the pipes, and then he poured that water all over the front steps and the entryway floor." She paused, letting the information sink in. "It is minus 30 degrees. Girl, what happens to water in 5 minutes out here?" "Ice," I breathed. "Black ice," she corrected, "invisible on those old dark stones," and he took the railing off the stairs. "I saw him throw it in the back of his truck. If you had walked up those steps in the dark, desperate and freezing, you would have slipped. You would have smashed your skull open on the stone threshold. And if that didn't kill you, the cold would have finished the job because he disabled the gas valve on the heater. I checked it after he left." The horror of it hit me harder than the cold. It wasn't just abandonment. It wasn't just a cruel lesson. It was a trap. Julian was here. He had prepared the site. They knew I would go there. It was the only logical place for me to go. They had herded me into this. Arthur dropping me off 5 miles out wasn't random. It was calculated to force me toward the only shelter available. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling, tears freezing on my cheeks. The woman released my arm, satisfied that I wasn't going to run. She looked back toward the station, her expression grim. "Name's Veronica," she grunted. "And right now, I am the only reason you are going to see the sun come up tomorrow." She stood up, crouching low to keep her profile against the tree line. "My van is a piece of junk, and the heater barely works. But it is better than dying in a snowbank. You have a choice, princess. You can walk up that hill and break your neck to make your family happy, or you can come with me." I looked at the ranger station one last time. It no longer looked like a sanctuary. It looked like a maw, a gaping mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The warmth I had hallucinated was a lie. The only real thing in this world was the biting cold and the homeless woman standing next to me. I looked at Veronica. She wasn't offering kindness. She was offering survival. "Take me with you," I said. She didn't smile. She just nodded, turned, and began to cut a path through the deep snow, away from the road, away from the trap, and into the deeper darkness of the forest. I followed her, leaving the girl I had been the heiress, the daughter, the victim buried somewhere back in the snow. The morning sun hitting the snow was blinding. It was not the gentle warmth of a new beginning. It was a harsh, interrogator's light that exposed everything the storm had tried to bury. We were sitting in a booth at the back of a diner called the Rusty Spoon, located on the edge of the trucking route. The air smelled of burnt bacon and stale coffee, a scent that felt grounding after the sterile, freezing emptiness of the woods. I wrapped my hands around a ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into my numb palms. Across from me, Veronica looked different. The heavy layers of rags were gone, replaced by a thick flannel shirt and the same worn coat. But she had washed her face in the restroom, without the grime and the scarf. She did not look like the crazy woman who had tackled me into a bush. She looked tired, yes, but her eyes possessed a terrifying clarity. She was slicing her pancakes with a precision that seemed out of place for someone who had spent the night in a broken-down van. "Eat," she said, pointing her knife at my untouched plate. "Your body is in shock. You need the glucose." "I am not hungry," I said. My voice sounded raspy. "I did not ask if you were hungry. I said you need the glucose. Brain function drops by 20% when you are hypoglycemic. We need you sharp." I looked at her. The diction had changed. The gravelly, street-toughened slur she had used last night had evaporated, replaced by a crisp, articulate cadence. "Who are you?" I asked again, the question hanging in the air between us. "You are not just some woman living in the woods. You talk like my father's lawyers." Veronica paused, a piece of pancake halfway to her mouth. She lowered the fork slowly. "I was a forensic auditor for 20 years. Pauline, I specialized in corporate fraud and asset recovery for firms in Chicago and New York. I hunted down money that people tried very hard to hide. I was good at it. Exceptional, actually." She took a sip of black coffee, her gaze drifting to the window where the snowplows were clearing the highway. "Then I got sick," she continued, her voice devoid of self-pity. "Medical debt is a unique kind of predator. It eats your savings, then your house, then your credit score, and finally your dignity. 2 years ago, I lost the condo. Last year, I lost the car. Now I live in a van and watch the world from the margins. But you do not lose the skills. You just lose the platform to use them." She reached into a canvas bag she had brought in with her and pulled out a rugged black plastic case. She opened it to reveal a drone. It was an older model, battered and scratched, with duct tape on one of the propeller guards, but the lens looked clean. "I use this to check the logging roads for security patrols so I do not get hassled," she explained, powering up a cracked tablet connected to the controller. "Old habits. I like to know who is in my perimeter. Last night, when I saw the headlights, I sent it up." She pushed the tablet across the greasy table toward me. "Watch." I looked at the screen. The video was grainy, shot in night vision mode, rendering everything in ghostly shades of green and black. The timestamp in the corner read 10:45 at night, 15 minutes before my father dropped me off. The camera hovered above the tree line. Looking down at the old ranger station, the structure looked like a black square against the snow. Parked right in front of the entrance was a vehicle I recognized instantly. It was a black SUV with custom rims, Julian's car. "Press play," Veronica said. I tapped the screen. The figure on the video was small, but the movements were distinct. Julian was wearing his expensive puffer jacket. The one he had bragged cost $1,200. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't rushing. He was moving with the casual arrogance of someone who knew no one was watching. He walked to the back of his SUV and pulled out a toolbox. Then he walked to the front steps of the station. I watched, my breath hitching in my throat. As my stepbrother knelt by the stairs, the camera zoomed in slightly. Veronica must have lowered the drone's altitude. The resolution blurred, but the action was clear. He was holding a power drill. "What is he doing?" I whispered. "He is removing the bolts from the handrail," Veronica answered, her voice cold. "The wood is old. It would not take much. Look." On the screen, Julian gave the wooden railing a hard shove. It wobbled dangerously. He shoved it again, and it detached from the bottom post, hanging loosely by a single top screw. If anyone grabbed it for support, it would swing out instantly, sending them plunging backward. But he wasn't done. He went back to the car and hauled out 2 large, 5-gallon plastic jugs. "Water," Veronica said. "He filled them at the creek crossing a mile back." I saw him stop. I watched in horror as Julian unscrewed the caps and methodically poured 10 gallons of water over the stone steps and the concrete landing in front of the heavy oak door. The water splashed and pooled. In the night vision, it looked like black ink spreading across the surface. "At -30 degrees, Veronica narrated, sounding like she was reading an autopsy report. "That water freezes in roughly 4 minutes. It forms a layer of transparent ice, black ice. You cannot see it at night. It looks just like wet stone. The video continued. Julian stepped carefully around his trap. He went to the side of the building. Where the external gas line connected to the station, he had a wrench in his hand. He clamped it onto the main valve and wrenched it clockwise until it stopped. He cut the heat, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He shut off the gas. Correct, Veronica said. So, let us reconstruct the scenario. You are dropped off. You are freezing. You run to the only shelter you know. You reach the steps. You grab the rail. The rail gives way. You slip on the invisible ice. Best case scenario. You break a leg or shatter your hip. Worst case, you hit your head on the stone threshold and suffer a traumatic brain injury or a subdural hematoma. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. And even if you survive the fall, she continued, you are lying on the ground, injured, unable to move, in sub-zero temperatures. You crawl to the door. You manage to get inside, but there is no heat. The gas is off. You freeze to death before sunrise. It looks like a tragic accident. The rebellious daughter tried to find shelter, slipped, fell, and succumbed to the elements. The video wasn't over. On the screen, Julian stood back to admire his work. He took out his phone. The screen of his device flared bright white in the darkness. He typed a message, then paused, and then he smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was a grin. He looked at the death trap he had just set for his stepsister, and he looked satisfied. He got back into his car and drove away, leaving the scene prepped for my arrival. I stared at the frozen image of his face. My hands were shaking so hard I had to put the coffee mug down to keep from spilling it. This wasn't a punishment, I whispered, the denial I had been clinging to. The childish hope that my father just wanted to teach me a lesson about gratitude disintegrated. They were trying to kill me. Not they, Veronica corrected. He was the executioner, but someone else was the architect. Look at the timestamp on the text message. I looked. 10:58 at night, 2 minutes before my father's car arrived at the drop-off point. He was signaling the all clear, Veronica said. He was telling them the trap was set. That is why your father waited until exactly 11 o'clock to kick you out. They had to make sure Julian was gone and the ice had set. I felt sick. A wave of nausea rolled through me, threatening to bring up the nothingness in my stomach. My father, my own father, he hadn't just been weak. He had driven me to a slaughterhouse. He had looked me in the eye, told me he loved me, and dropped me off 5 miles from a location rigged to kill me. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. I am just difficult. I know that. I argue with Valerie. I embarrass them sometimes. But murder, why would they risk murder? Veronica took a bite of her bacon, chewing slowly. Pauline, in my line of work, I learned that people commit crimes for 3 reasons: passion, fear, or greed. This was too calculated for passion. It was too elaborate for fear. That leaves greed. She wiped her mouth with a paper napkin. Tell me about your finances, she said. Not your allowance, your legal standing. What happened yesterday when the clock struck 12? I turned 18, I said, and I became an adult. And, Veronica pressed, think what legally changes status at 18 in your family. The answer came to me slowly, rising through the fog of betrayal. My grandfather, Silas Marchant, had been a hard man, a miner who struck it rich not in gold, but in lithium. He never trusted Valerie. He called her a viper in silk. When he died 5 years ago, he left everything in a trust. The mine, I gasped. The Silver Creek lithium deposit. Who controls it? My father and Valerie have been the trustees, I explained, the pieces clicking together like the tumblers of a safe. They manage the profits. They pay themselves management fees, but the will states that on my 18th birthday, full ownership and control transfers solely to me. Bingo, Veronica said softly. It is worth millions, I said. my mind racing. The geological surveys last year showed the reserves were 3 times larger than they thought. It is not just a mine anymore, it is a strategic asset for battery manufacturing. And if you die without a will, Veronica asked, or if you go missing? It goes to my next of kin, I said. My father. And by extension, Valerie, Veronica finished. And eventually, Julian. She tapped the tablet screen again, turning it off. They did not kick you out because you were a brat. Pauline, they kicked you out because you were about to sign the papers that would cut off their supply of free money. They needed you to have an accident before you could meet with the lawyers. If you die today, or if you disappear, they retain control of the trust, forever. I sat back against the red vinyl booth. The noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, the sizzle of the grill seemed to fade away. All I could see was the smile on Julian's face in the green light of the drone footage. All I could feel was the phantom sensation of that black ice under my boots. They had planned this for months, maybe years. The therapy sessions to paint me as unstable, the boarding school to isolate me, the narrative that I was out of control. It was all groundwork. It was all a prelude to last night. They had built a coffin for me, and my father had driven the hearse. We have to go to the police, I said, reaching for my coat. We have the video. We have the proof. Veronica reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was iron. Sit down, she ordered. But we have evidence. You have a grainy video of a boy pouring water and fixing a railing, Veronica said sharply. A good defense lawyer and your family can afford the best will argue he was cleaning the steps, or that he was trying to fix the railing and broke it by accident. They will say he turned off the gas because he smelled a leak and wanted to be safe. They will spin this. And you? You are the unstable daughter with a history of acting out, making wild accusations against your grieving family. So what do we do? I demanded. Just let them get away with it. No, Veronica said. She released my wrist and picked up the check the waitress had dropped off. She pulled a crumpled $10 bill and a handful of quarters from her pocket, all the money she had in the world, and placed it on the table. We do not just go to the police, Veronica said, her eyes narrowing. We go to war, but we do it correctly. We need undeniable proof. We need to catch them celebrating your death before they realize you are alive. And more importantly, we need to secure your assets. She looked at me. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something almost maternal in her expression. Not warmth, but a fierce, protective solidarity. You have a choice right now. Pauline, she said. You can be the victim who got lucky, or you can be the CEO who cleans house. Which one is it going to be? I looked at the drone case. I thought of the cold wind. I thought of my father's silence. I want to destroy them, I said. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. Good, Veronica said, sliding out of the booth. Then let us go get your inheritance. The grief I had felt in the woods, the shivering, pathetic longing for a father who did not exist, evaporated. It was replaced by a sensation that was entirely new to me. It felt like swallowing a jagged stone that settled deep in my gut, radiating a cold, hard weight. It was not hot, flashing anger. It was a freezing, clinical rage. It was the absolute clarity of a survivor who realizes the hunter has missed his shot. And now, the rifle is lying in the snow between them. Veronica drove her van, which rattled and groaned over every pothole, toward the county seat. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my fingernails dug crescents into my palms. You need to understand the timeline, Veronica said, keeping her eyes on the slushy road. The law is specific. Your grandfather's trust likely has a contingency clause. Most of them do. It usually states that if the primary beneficiary, that is you, is unable to take possession of the assets due to death, incapacitation, or unexplained absence within a certain window of the triggering event, the trustees retain control. So if I am missing, I said, staring at the gray landscape rolling by. "If you are missing," Veronica confirmed, "if you are dead, or if you are simply not there to sign the papers within 48 hours of turning 18, if that happens, Arthur and Valerie can file an emergency motion to maintain stewardship of the assets to protect the estate. Once they get that extension, they can drain the accounts, leverage the mine against loans, or restructure the holdings. By the time you showed up, if you ever showed up, the shell would be there. But the pearl would be gone." "They wanted to run out the clock," I said, "or stop the clock permanently." "Exactly. That is why we are not going to the lawyers yet. We are going to the sheriff. We need a paper trail that starts today, right now. We need an official record that you are alive, present, and the victim of a crime committed by their proxy." "Attempted murder," I said. "No," Veronica countered firmly. "Not yet. If you walk in there screaming murder, you sound hysterical. Proving intent is hard. Julian's lawyer will say he was just pranking you, or he was confused. We need something that sticks immediately. We need something that gets him in cuffs and forces Valerie to react. We are charging him with malicious destruction of property and reckless endangerment." We pulled into the parking lot of the sheriff's department. It was a squat, brick building that looked like it had been built in the 70s and hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since. The American flag out front was whipped straight out by the biting wind. Sheriff Miller was a man who looked like he was carved out of the same granite as the mountains surrounding us. He was sitting behind a desk buried under paperwork, nursing a styrofoam cup of coffee. He looked up as we entered, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in our appearance, me in my expensive but rumpled coat, and Veronica in her flannel, looking every bit the transient she technically was. "Pauline Marchant," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I saw your daddy's Rover heading back to the highway late last night. Figured you were with him." "He left," I said, my voice steady. "But he left me behind." Veronica stepped forward, placing the tablet on his desk without asking for permission. "Sheriff, I think you need to watch this. It was recorded last night at 10:45, at the old ranger station up on Fire Road 9. Miller looked at her, then at the tablet. He didn't ask who she was. He just leaned forward and tapped the screen. The room was silent for 2 minutes. I watched Miller's face. He didn't flinch, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten as he watched Julian pour the water. He watched the dismantling of the rail. He watched the disabling of the gas valve. When the video ended, Miller sat back, the leather of his chair creaking loudly. He looked at me, really looked at me, assessing the lack of frostbite, the terror that had hardened into resolve. "He tampered with a federal structure," Miller said. "That station is technically Forest Service property, even if it is abandoned, and creating a hazard like that knowing someone might use it for shelter in a storm." "I was heading there," I said. "It was the only shelter within 5 miles. If Veronica hadn't stopped me, I would be dead." "Sheriff," Miller rubbed his face with a hand that looked like a baseball mitt. He knew the politics of this town. He knew the Marchants were the biggest taxpayers in the county. He knew Valerie sat on the board of the charity that bought the department their new cruisers. But he also knew the law. And he had the look of a man who was tired of rich kids thinking the county was their personal playground. "I can't get him on intent to kill with this," Miller said, echoing Veronica's earlier assessment. "Not without a confession, but I can get him for felony vandalism, reckless endangerment, and trespassing. That is enough for an arrest warrant. And considering the weather conditions last night, I am adding a citation for depraved indifference." "Do it," I said. Miller typed something into his computer, his thick fingers moving surprisingly fast. "Where is he?" "Knowing Julian," I said. Checking the time on the wall clock, it was just past noon. "He is at the Black Antler. He thinks he won. He is celebrating." Miller stood up and grabbed his hat. "Wait here." The next hour was an exercise in agonizing patience. I sat on a hard wooden bench, staring at the wanted posters on the wall, while Veronica paced the small waiting area. She was calculating. I could see her mind working, moving chess pieces that only she could see. "When they bring him in," she instructed me, keeping her voice low so the dispatcher behind the glass couldn't hear, "do not say a word to him, not one word. Let him see you. Let him see you breathing. Let him see you standing. That is the weapon." The radio squawked. "Suspect in custody. En route." 20 minutes later, the back door of the station opened. 2 deputies walked in, flanking Julian. He looked ridiculous. He was wearing a designer sweater and snow pants, his hair perfectly styled, but his face was a mask of drunken confusion and outrage. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He was shouting something about his mother, about lawyers, about how this was all a misunderstanding. Then he saw me. He stopped dead in the middle of the hallway. The deputies had to shove him to keep him moving. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. I stood up slowly. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I just looked at him with absolute, blank indifference. "Pauline," he choked out. Your booking is that way," one of the deputies said, steering him toward the holding cells. Julian kept twisting his head back to look at me, his eyes wide with panic. He wasn't scared of the police. He was scared because the variable he had eliminated was back in the equation. "He will call her," I said to Veronica. "Yes," she nodded. "She is coming." It took less than 40 minutes. The speed of money is faster than the speed of light in Silver Creek. The double doors of the station flew open, and Valerie marched in. She was wearing a white fur coat that probably cost more than Veronica's van and everything in it. Her heels clicked sharply on the linoleum floor, a staccato rhythm of authority. She was followed by a man in a gray suit, the family attorney. "Mr. Henderson." She went straight to the desk sergeant, ignoring everyone else in the room. "I am here to post bail for my son, Julian Vance," she announced, her voice crisp and imperious. "And I want to know why he was dragged out of a restaurant in handcuffs like a common criminal. Charges are serious. Mrs. Marchant," the sergeant mumbled, looking intimidated. "Vandalism, endangerment, bail is set at $10,000. "Fine," she snapped, pulling a checkbook from her designer bag. "Write it up. I want him out now." She signed the check with a flourish, tearing it out and sliding it across the counter as if she were tipping a waiter. She turned to the lawyer. "Deal with this mess. Henderson, I want the charges dropped by Monday morning. I will look into the evidence." "Valerie," Henderson said soothingly, "there is no evidence." She hissed. "Just some mistake. Hello? Valerie?" My voice cut through her performance like a razor blade. Valerie froze. Her back stiffened. For a second, she didn't move. She just stood there, clutching her pen, her knuckles turning white. Then, slowly, terrifyingly slowly, she turned around. She saw me sitting on the bench. I was still wearing the clothes from last night. I looked tired. I looked cold. But I was there. I expected shock. I expected a feigned performance of relief, the "oh my God, you are safe" act that she used for the neighbors. I expected tears. I got none of that. Valerie's face was a stone mask. Her eyes, perfectly made up with smoky shadow, swept over me. She checked my hands. She checked my boots. She checked the person sitting next to me, Veronica. There was no relief in her eyes. There was only a cold, calculating hatred. It was the look a general gives an enemy soldier who survived the first wave of artillery. She wasn't happy I was alive. She was furious that her problem was still breathing. "Pauline," she said. Her tone was flat, dead. "We thought you were walking." "I was," I said. "But the weather got bad. Lucky for me. I didn't make it to the ranger station. I hear it is dangerous up there. Slippery steps. No heat." Valerie's eyes narrowed by a fraction of a millimeter. She knew. She knew that I knew. The pretense of the rebellious daughter narrative hung between us, tattered and useless. "Your father was worried," she lied. The lie was so lazy it was almost insulting. "He is at home," sick with worry. I bet he is, I said. Tell him I am fine. Tell him I will see him soon. You should come home, Valerie said. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. The car is outside. You look terrible. You need a bath. She wanted me back in the house. She wanted me back under her roof, behind her gates, where she could control the food, the phone lines, and the narrative. If I got in that car, I would never walk out again. I am staying in town, I said. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, her mask slipping just a little. You have no money. You have nowhere to go. I have friends, I said, tilting my head toward Veronica. Valerie looked at Veronica with undisguised disgust. A vagrant. What is your plan, Pauline? Stop this childish game. Get in the car. At that moment, the door to the holding area buzzed, and Julian walked out. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago, when he saw his mother. He rushed toward her, but when he saw me standing there, confronting her, he stopped. Mom, he whispered. She knows. Shut up. Julian, Valerie hissed without looking at him. Her eyes were still locked on mine. I am not coming home, Valerie, I said, standing up to meet her gaze. I was taller than her in my boots. And I am not playing a game. You threw me to the wolves last night. You forgot one thing. Wolves run in packs. Valerie stared at me for a long moment. Then, a small, cruel smile touched her lips. It was terrifying because it was genuine. She realized the easy way was gone. Now, she had to do it the hard way, and she liked the hard way. Fine, she said softly, so only I could hear. Stay in the cold, Pauline, but remember, winter lasts a long time in Montana. And you are just one girl with $500 and a homeless pet. She turned on her heel, grabbed Julian by the arm, and dragged him toward the exit. Come on, we are leaving. The lawyer followed them, casting a confused glance back at me. The door slammed shut, leaving a sudden silence in the station. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My knees felt weak. She is going to come for you, Veronica said quietly from beside me. She is going to come with everything she has. I know, I said. She thinks she has the advantage because she has the money in the house, Veronica said. She thinks you are just surviving. She doesn't know what we are going to do tomorrow. No, I said, watching the expensive car peel out of the parking lot through the glass doors. She thinks this is a family squabble. She doesn't realize it is a hostile takeover. I turned to Veronica. Let us go. We have papers to prepare. The war had started. They had fired the first shot with ice and silence. I was going to fire back with ink and law, and I wasn't going to miss. The silence following our departure from the sheriff's station did not last long. In fact, it lasted exactly 11 minutes. That was how long it took for Valerie to declare war. We were sitting in Veronica's van, the engine idling with a rough, coughing rhythm as we tried to warm up before heading back to the motel. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up, not with one notification, but with a cascade of them. It was a digital avalanche. My phone vibrated so hard in my hand it felt like it was burning. Text messages, social media tags, missed calls. They were pouring in from aunts I had not spoken to in years, from cousins who only called when they wanted concert tickets, and from friends who I thought knew me. How could you do this to your father? I heard about the drugs. Please get help. Pauline. Lying to the police. Really, after everything Valerie has done for you? You are sick. Stay away from us. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was disorienting. 10 minutes ago, I was the victim of a calculated murder attempt. Now, according to the glowing screen in my hand, I was a monster. Check your accounts, Veronica said. She was not looking at her phone. She was watching the rearview mirror, checking for tails. I opened my banking app. It was a student checking account, funded by a monthly allowance that Arthur deposited. I used it for books, coffee, and gas. I tapped the icon. Account status frozen. Contact administrator. I tried my credit card app. Card canceled by primary account holder. They cut me off, I said, a wave of cold panic washing over me that had nothing to do with the weather. Everything. I have zero access. I cannot even buy a sandwich. It is the standard playbook, Veronica said calmly. Financial strangulation. She wants you hungry. She wants you desperate. She wants you to realize that without them, you are nothing but a girl in the cold. Look at this, I said. Opening Facebook, Valerie had been busy. In the time it took us to walk from the station to the van, she had composed a masterpiece of fiction. It was a long, emotional post, accompanied by a photo of me from 2 years ago, looking tired and unkempt after a bout of the flu. Friends and family. The post began. Our hearts are breaking today. As many of you know, our beloved Pauline has been struggling with severe mental health issues and substance dependency for some time. We have tried to keep this private to protect her dignity, but today, the situation escalated. She has run away and fallen under the influence of a dangerous transient woman who is manipulating her paranoia to extort money from our family. Pauline is confused and makes false accusations against her brother, Julian, during a psychotic break. Please, if you see her, do not engage. She is not herself. We just want our little girl home safe to get the treatment she desperately needs. Pray for Pauline. Mental health awareness. It had 300 likes already. The comments were a sea of sympathy for Valerie and prayers for the troubled daughter. She is destroying me, I whispered. She is rewriting reality. Everyone believes her. Look at these comments. People I grew up with all think I'm crazy. Veronica reached over and took the phone from my hand. She turned it off and tossed it onto the dashboard. Stop looking at it, she commanded. That is not reality. That is a smokescreen. It is called an extinction burst. A what? An extinction burst, Veronica explained, shifting the van into gear. In behavioral psychology, when you stop reinforcing a behavior, or when a manipulator loses control, they do not just give up. They escalate. They panic. They throw everything they have at the wall to see what sticks. She gestured at the phone. This is not a sign of strength. Pauline, this is a scream of terror. She knows the legal transfer of the mine is happening. She knows she failed to kill you. Now she is trying to murder your credibility because it is the only card she has left. We drove in silence to the motel. The sky was turning a bruised purple as evening approached. The world felt hostile. Every car that passed us looked suspicious. Every person walking on the sidewalk looked like they might be one of Valerie's spies. When we got into the motel room, the smell of stale cigarettes and mildew felt almost comforting. It was a bunker. I paced the small room, my mind racing. She froze my money. She turned the town against me. What is next? Is she going to send someone to hurt us? She might, Veronica said, pulling the curtains tight. But she is smart enough to know that if anything physical happens to you now, after she bailed Julian out, she goes to prison for life. She does not want to create a martyr. She wants to create a lunatic. She wants you to break. She wants you to scream, to attack her, to do something public and violent so she can get a judge to sign an emergency guardianship order. My phone, sitting on the bedside table where I had left it, began to ring. It was not a text this time. It was a call. The ID read Dad. I froze. I stared at the name. For 18 years. That name had meant safety. It had meant the person who taught me to fish. The person who read me stories. The person who was supposed to stand between me and the dark. Answer it, Veronica said softly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. She clicked it on and set it on the table next to the phone. Put it on speaker. Do not say anything emotional. Just listen. My hand trembled as I pressed the green button. Hello? Pauline. Arthur's voice filled the room. It was weak, shaking, and slurred. He had been drinking. I could hear the clink of glass in the background. Pauline, thank God. Where are you, honey? I am safe, I said. No thanks to you. Baby, please, he pleaded. You have to understand. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know what Julian was going to do. I just thought Valerie said you needed a scare. A night in the cold to toughen you up. That is all. You left me 5 miles from town in a blizzard. Dad, I said, my voice flat. And Julian rigged the heating. He iced the stairs. He didn't want to scare me. He wanted me dead. No, Arthur stammered. That is just a misunderstanding. Julian is a good boy. He was just joking. It was a prank. Pauline, a bad prank. He feels terrible. We all do. I looked at Veronica. She shook her head, her eyes disgusted. A prank, I repeated. Sheriff Miller didn't think it was a prank. He arrested him, Dad. I know, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And that is why you need to come home, right now. We need to fix this. Valerie is very upset. This arrest looks bad for the family. It looks bad for the business. You need to come home and tell the sheriff it was all a game. Tell him you consented. We can make this go away. You want me to lie, I said. I want you to save this family, Arthur snapped. A flash of anger breaking through the pathetic whining. Then he pulled it back. Look, Pauline, I transferred $10,000 to your account. I can transfer more. Just come home. We will have a nice dinner. We will forget all of this. Please. For me. I looked at the recorder spinning silently on the table. You didn't transfer anything, Dad, I said. Valerie froze my accounts. There was a long silence on the other end. She did what, he mumbled. She cut me off. She posted lies about me on the internet, and you are calling me to ask me to protect the people who tried to kill me. It is complicated. Pauline, Arthur cried out. You don't understand the pressure I am under. If the investors hear about this, if the trust gets tied up in a legal battle, we lose everything. I am doing this for you. No, I said. You are doing this because you are afraid of her. You have always been afraid of her. You sold me out for a quiet life. Dad, Pauline, don't you dare. Goodbye, Arthur. I hung up. The silence that followed was heavy. But it wasn't sad. It was final. The last thread that bound me to the name Marchant had just snapped. I felt lighter. I felt cold. Yes, but it was a clean cold. Veronica reached out and clicked the recorder off. He admitted knowledge of the event, she said, analyzing the tape immediately. He admitted the family is worried about the trust. He tried to bribe you to recant a police report. That is witness tampering. That is another felony. He sounded pathetic, I said. He is a coward, Veronica agreed. And cowards are dangerous because they will do anything to avoid pain. But Valerie is not a coward. She is a predator. And right now, she is cornered. Veronica stood up and went to the small desk in the corner of the room. She swept the motel brochures and the Holy Bible to the floor. Clearing the surface, she reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of yellow legal pads, a handful of pens, and a thick folder of documents she had salvaged from her van. We have work to do, she announced. What kind of work? I asked. Wiping a stray tear from my cheek, I was done crying for my father. Valerie's strategy is based on speed, Veronica said. She needs you declared incompetent or dead within the next 24 hours. If she can get a judge to sign an emergency mental health hold, she becomes your guardian again. Then she controls the lawsuit. She controls the trust. She controls you. She slapped a legal pad onto the desk. So we are going to beat her with paper, Veronica said. We are going to draft an affidavit of competency. We are going to document every interaction, every text message, every threat, and most importantly, we are going to draft a formal letter to the Blackwood law firm, the firm that manages your grandfather's trust. Mr. Blackwood, I asked. He was Grandpa's friend. He hates Valerie. Exactly, Veronica said. We need to get to him before she does. We need to prove to him that you are lucid, rational, and the victim of a conspiracy. If we can get Blackwood on our side, he locks the trust down. He cuts off their access to the funds. But I can't pay a lawyer, I said. I have no money. You do not need money to write a letter, Veronica said, uncapping a pen. You need facts, and I was the best auditor in Chicago. I know how to organize facts so they look like bullets. We worked through the night. The wind howled outside, shaking the thin window pane. But inside, the air was thick with focus. Veronica was a machine. She grilled me on dates, times, and conversations. We built a timeline of abuse that went back 5 years. We cataloged every instance of Valerie isolating me, every therapy session she forced me into, every lie she told the school. We transcribed the voice recording of Arthur's call. We printed screenshots of Valerie's Facebook post and the hateful comments. We organized the metadata from the drone video. By 3 a.m, the desk was covered in yellow paper filled with Veronica's sharp, angular handwriting. This is it, she said, rubbing her eyes. This is the dossier. It proves a pattern of behavior. It establishes motive. It refutes the insanity claim. I looked at the stack of papers. It was my life, reduced to evidence. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow, Veronica said, looking at me with a grim smile. We put on our armor. We went to the bank. We go to the lawyers. And we take back what is yours. Valerie will be there, I said. She tracks my phone. She knows we are in town. Let her come, Veronica said. She thinks she is coming to collect a mentally ill teenager. She has no idea she is walking into a forensic audit. I looked out the window. The storm had passed. The sky was clear and cold, filled with sharp, unblinking stars. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away in the friction of the work. Get some sleep, Veronica said, lying down on the other bed fully clothed. You need to look sharp tomorrow. No more victim. Pauline. Tomorrow. You are the CEO. I lay down, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say. I replayed Arthur's voice in my head, letting the betrayal harden my resolve like steel tempered in ice. They wanted a war, fine. I would give them a war. But I wouldn't fight it with screaming and tears. I would fight it with ink and signatures, and I would win. The sun rose over Silver Creek with a deceptive brilliance, casting long, sharp shadows across the dirty snow in the motel parking lot. It was 9 a.m. We had survived the night, but the real test was just beginning. Today was not about survival. It was about transformation. I stood in front of the cracked mirror in the motel room, looking at the girl reflected there. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were rimmed with red. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she was wearing the same clothes she had nearly frozen to death in 2 nights ago. That girl was a victim. That girl was Arthur Marchant's daughter, the one he could throw away like garbage. I could not be her anymore. If I walked into First Montana Bank looking like a runaway, I would be escorted out by security before I could open my mouth. We have $40 left, Veronica said, counting the crumpled bills on the bedspread. That is our budget for the war chest. It is enough, I said. We drove to the Salvation Army on the edge of town. It was a cavernous, dusty building that smelled of mothballs and other people's memories. I moved through the racks with a singular purpose. I did not look at the jeans or the soft sweaters. I went straight to the section marked Women's Career. I found it buried between a neon windbreaker and a faded floral dress. It was a navy blue blazer, slightly oversized, with structured shoulders and gold buttons. It was wool, heavy and scratchy, but it had a stiffness to it that felt like armor. I found a white button-down shirt that was 2 sizes too big, but I could tuck it in. I found a pair of gray slacks that were hemmed too short, but with my boots, no one would notice. I took the outfit into the changing room. Under the fluorescent lights, I stripped off my expensive, ruined cashmere. I put on the stiff wool. I buttoned the shirt all the way to the top. I looked in the mirror. The clothes were old. They smelled faintly of lavender detergent and dust, but they changed the way I stood. I looked like someone who had a job to do. I looked like someone who signed checks, not someone who begged for them. When I stepped out, Veronica was waiting. I stopped in my tracks. The homeless woman who had dragged me into the bushes was gone. In her place stood a professional. Veronica had gone into the bathroom with her duffel bag and emerged as the auditor she used to be. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit that she must have kept wrapped in plastic in the bottom of her van for years. It was dated. The cut was from a decade ago, but it was pressed and clean. She had pulled her graying hair back into a severe, tight bun. She had scrubbed the grime from her hands and face. She didn't look rich. She looked dangerous. She looked like the person the government sends when you stop paying your taxes. "How do I look?" I asked. Veronica adjusted her cuffs, her eyes critical. "You look like you are ready to foreclose on a house. Good. Let us go." We drove to the center of town. First Montana Bank was the tallest building in Silver Creek, a 3-story structure of sandstone and glass that loomed over Main Street. It was where the ranching money, the mining money, and the timber money slept. My grandfather had helped build it. His portrait was probably still hanging in the boardroom. Veronica parked the van 2 blocks away. "We walk from here," she said. "We do not want them to see the vehicle. It ruins the image." We walked down the sidewalk, our boots crunching on the gritted ice. The wind was still cold, biting at my exposed face, but I didn't hunch my shoulders. I walked with my chin up. I matched Veronica's stride, step for step. We were a 2-woman army marching on the Capitol. As we reached the heavy glass doors of the bank, I felt a tremor of fear in my stomach. This was the point of no return. Once I walked in there, I was initiating a legal conflict that would tear my family apart permanently. "Chin up," Veronica whispered without looking at me. "You own the place. Remember that. They just work there." I pushed the doors open. The air inside was warm and smelled of polished brass and money. The lobby was quiet, the hush only broken by the soft clicking of keyboards and the murmur of tellers. It was a cathedral of finance. We walked straight toward the reception desk in the center of the lobby. The woman behind the desk was young, with perfectly coiffed hair and a headset. She looked up as we approached, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second as she took in our thrift store suits and the intensity in our eyes. "Can I help you, ladies?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. She was already reaching for the phone, likely to call security. We did not fit the profile of the usual clientele. "I am here to see Mr. Blackwood," I said. My voice was calm, projected from my diaphragm, just as Veronica had coached me in the van. "The director of the trust department," the receptionist blinked. "Mr. Blackwood is very busy. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but he will want to see me." "I am afraid I cannot." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my documents. I slapped them onto the marble counter, not hard enough to cause a scene, but firm enough to make a sound that echoed in the quiet lobby, the sound of authority. "My name is Pauline Marchant," I stated. "This is my birth certificate. This is my state identification. Yesterday was my 18th birthday. I am the sole beneficiary of the Silas Marchant Trust, which your bank manages. I am here to formally take possession of my assets and to review the current standing of the accounts." The receptionist froze. The name Marchant was royalty in this building. She looked at the ID, then up at my face, then back at the ID. Her flush deepened. Oh, she stammered. "Ms. Marchant, I didn't recognize. I am so sorry. Please, let me call his assistant." "Tell him it is urgent," Veronica added. She didn't shout, but her voice had the steel edge of a command. "Tell him we are here to discuss unauthorized disbursements by the previous trustees." The receptionist's eyes went wide. She picked up the phone, her hands shaking slightly. I stood there, my hands clasped behind my back, watching the elevator doors. I felt a surge of power. It was working. They weren't looking at my second-hand shoes. They were listening to my words. But the victory was short-lived. Before the receptionist could finish dialing, the heavy glass doors behind us flew open. A gust of freezing wind swept through the lobby, followed by the clatter of high heels and the heavy tread of expensive leather loafers. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I could feel the temperature in the room drop. "Pauline!" The scream was shrill, laced with a theatrical panic that grated on my nerves. I turned slowly. Valerie was rushing across the marble floor. She was wearing her full battle regalia, a long mink coat, diamond stud earrings, and a face contorted into a mask of desperate motherly concern. Behind her trailed Arthur, looking pale and shrunken in his wool overcoat, and Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, who was checking his watch as if this were just another billable hour. They had found us. Of course they had. I had turned my phone on for 5 minutes in the car to check the address of the bank. 5 minutes was all Valerie needed. "Oh, thank God!" Valerie cried out. Ignoring the startled customers and the staring tellers, she rushed toward me, her arms outstretched as if to embrace me. "We have been so worried, Pauline. Baby, what are you doing?" I took a step back, placing myself just out of her reach. Veronica stepped sideways, creating a subtle physical barrier between us. "I am doing business. Valerie," I said cold and loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. Valerie stopped, her hands hovering in the air. She looked at my suit. She looked at Veronica. A flash of pure venom crossed her eyes, gone so quickly that only I saw it, replaced instantly by the tearful performance. "Business." She let out a choked, incredulous laugh. She turned to the receptionist, who was watching with her mouth open. "I am so sorry. My daughter is not well. She has been having an episode. We have been looking for her for 2 days." She turned back to me, her voice dropping to a soothing, patronizing COO. "Pauline, honey, look at you. You are wearing rags. You are confused. Come with Mommy. We have the car outside. We are going to take you to a nice doctor who can help you sleep." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. In 3 sentences, she had framed me as incompetent and herself as the savior. Arthur stepped up beside her. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at the daughter he had betrayed. "Pauline, please," he mumbled. "Just come home. Don't make a scene in the bank. People are watching." "Let them watch," I said. "I want them to watch." "She is having a breakdown," Valerie announced to the room. Her voice rising, she motioned to the security guard who was approaching cautiously. "Officer, please help us. My daughter is mentally unstable. She has run away from home. We need to get her to the hospital before she hurts herself." The security guard looked at me. He saw a young woman in an ill-fitting suit standing next to a stern older woman. Then he looked at Valerie, dripping in furs and confidence. Bias is a powerful thing. He took a step toward me. "Miss," the guard said, his hand resting on his belt, "maybe you should go with your parents." "They are not my parents," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "He is my father, and she is my stepmother, and I am 18 years old. I am a legal adult, and unless I am under arrest, you cannot touch me." "She is off her medication," Valerie shouted, abandoning the gentle act. She lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Her fingers dug into my bicep through the wool blazer. "Pauline, stop this instant. You are embarrassing the family. You are sick." I looked down at her hand clutching my arm. The manicure was perfect. The diamond ring on her finger glinted under the chandelier, a ring bought with money from my grandfather's mine. "Let go of me," I said. "Henderson," Valerie shrieked at the lawyer. "Do something. Tell them she is incompetent." "Mr." Henderson cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Miss Marchant, given the circumstances and your recent behavior, your parents have filed for an emergency temporary guardianship. It would be in your best interest to comply voluntarily." "Filed," Veronica spoke up for the first time. Her voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. "Filed is not granted, unless you have a court order signed by a judge in your hand right now. Mr. Henderson, she is a free agent, and you know that." Henderson paused, looking at Veronica. He recognized the tone. He recognized the vocabulary. He realized suddenly that the homeless woman was not a prop. "Who are you?" Henderson asked. "I am her advisor," Veronica said, "and you are interrupting a private meeting between a client and her bank." "She is a homeless junkie," Valerie spat, tightening her grip on my arm. "She kidnapped my daughter." "Get your hand off me." "Valerie," I said, my voice dropping an octave. I leaned in close to her face. "Or I will have the sheriff arrest you for assault right here in front of the loan officers. Do you want to go to the same cell Julian was in yesterday?" Valerie flinched. The mention of Julian hit a nerve. Her grip loosened slightly. "You ungrateful little wretch," she hissed, her voice low and toxic. "I will bury you. You think you can walk in here and take the money. You are nothing. You are a child playing dress-up in dead people's clothes. I am the heir," I said, "and you are just the help." I ripped my arm away from her grasp. "Officer!" Valerie screamed at the guard. "She is violent. Grab her!" The lobby was in chaos now. Customers were standing up. Tellers were peering over the glass. The security guard looked unsure, his hand hovering over his radio. Just then, the elevator doors pinged open. A man stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Valerie's car. He had the bearing of a man who owned the building. Because, in a way, he did. It was Mr. Blackwood. He looked at the scene in his lobby. He saw Valerie, red-faced and screaming. He saw Arthur cowering. He saw the security guard confused. And then he saw me. He stopped. He looked at my oversized blazer. He looked at my defiant stance. He looked at the determination in my eyes that mirrored the man he had done business with for 40 years. "Mr. Blackwood," Valerie shouted, smoothing her fur coat, switching instantly back to the victim role. "Thank heavens you are here. Pauline is having a crisis. She came here to harass the staff. We are just trying to get her out." Mr. Blackwood ignored her. He walked straight past Valerie as if she were a piece of furniture. He walked right up to me. "Pauline?" he asked softly. "Hello, Mr. Blackwood?" I said. "I apologize for the noise. My stepmother was just leaving." Mr. Blackwood looked at Valerie, then back at me. A slow, knowing look passed between us. He had hated Valerie since the day my father brought her home. He had watched her spend the trust's money on parties and cars while I was sent away to boarding schools. He knew. "I see," Mr. Blackwood said. He turned to the security guard. "Frank, stand down." Then he turned to Valerie. His voice was polite, but freezing cold. "Mrs. Marchant, this is a bank, not a domestic dispute arena. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have you removed." "But she—" Valerie started, her eyes bulging. "Pauline is a client of this bank," Blackwood said, "and she has requested a meeting. I am going to escort her to my office now." "You can't," Valerie screeched. "She is incompetent. We are filing the papers." "Then bring the papers when they are signed," Blackwood said dismissively. "Until then, she is the primary beneficiary." He gestured toward the open elevator. "Pauline, shall we?" I nodded. I looked at Valerie one last time. She was trembling with rage, her face a mask of ugly, twisted defeat. Arthur was staring at his shoes. Henderson was checking his phone, already distancing himself from the losing side. "After you, Veronica," I said. Veronica smirked at Valerie as she walked past, clutching her legal pad like a shield. I stepped into the elevator. Mr. Blackwood followed and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors slid shut, the last thing I saw was Valerie Marchant standing in the middle of the lobby, realizing that for the first time in her life, she was on the wrong side of the glass. The doors closed. The silence returned. We were going up. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a dinner bell signaling the end of a long famine. We stepped out onto the executive floor, where the carpet was thick enough to silence footsteps and the air smelled of lemon oil and old money, but the peace was shattered instantly. The second elevator, located just 10 feet away, pinged aggressively. The doors parted, and Valerie, Arthur, and Mr. Henderson spilled out. They were breathless, their composure unraveling with every second that ticked by. They had evidently scrambled to catch the service car, desperate to intercept us before we crossed the threshold of the trust department. "Stop!" Henderson shouted, abandoning his professional decorum. He marched toward us, brandishing his briefcase like a weapon. "Mr. Blackwood, as legal counsel for the Marchant family, I am formally putting you on notice. If you allow this meeting to proceed, you are aiding and abetting a person of diminished capacity." Mr. Blackwood stopped. He did not turn around immediately. He adjusted his cufflinks, a slow, deliberate movement that communicated absolute boredom with Henderson's theatrics. Then he turned. "Diminished capacity," Blackwood repeated, tasting the words as if they were spoiled milk. "That is a serious accusation, Henderson." "And it is accurate," Henderson insisted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Pauline Marchant is currently suffering from acute stress reaction and paranoid delusions. We are filing for an emergency conservatorship as we speak. Any document she signs today will be voided by a judge tomorrow, and your bank will be liable for negligence. Do you want that exposure? Silas. Do you want a malpractice suit attached to your name because you let a runaway teenager play CEO?" Valerie stepped up beside him, her chest heaving. "She is sick. Silas, look at her. She is wearing rags. She thinks people are trying to kill her. You cannot let her access those funds. She will spend it on drugs or give it to this homeless woman." She pointed a trembling finger at Veronica. I felt a flash of the old fear, the conditioned response to Valerie's voice, but then I felt the weight of the legal pad Veronica had shoved into my hand earlier. It was heavy. It was real. Before I could speak, Veronica stepped forward. She did not shout. She did not look like a homeless woman anymore. She looked like a shark in a thrift store suit. "Mr. Henderson," Veronica said, her voice cutting through the hallway like a scalpel. "I assume you are referring to Montana Code Annotated, Title 72, Chapter 5, regarding the protection of persons under disability and their property. Is that correct?" Henderson blinked, taken aback. "Who are you to quote code to me?" "Answer the question," Veronica snapped. "Are you basing your claim on Title 72? "Yes, obviously," Henderson sputtered. The code allows for a temporary guardian to be appointed only upon clear and convincing evidence presented to a district court," Veronica interrupted, her cadence rapid and precise. "It requires a medical evaluation by a licensed professional. It requires a court hearing where the proposed ward has the right to counsel. Tell me, counselor, has a judge signed an order? Has a doctor examined her? Or are you basing your entire legal strategy on the hearsay of a stepmother who was arrested yesterday for disorderly conduct?" Henderson's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Valerie. "She was not arrested. Her son was," Veronica countered, "and she is currently under investigation for filing a false police report regarding Pauline's disappearance. I have the case number right here if you would like to call Sheriff Miller. In the absence of a signed court order, Pauline Marchant is a legal adult with full rights of survivorship. If you try to physically impede her access to her property, that is not guardianship, that is unlawful restraint, and I will personally file a complaint with the State Bar Association against you for ethical misconduct before lunch." The silence that followed was absolute. Henderson looked at Veronica as if she had just pulled a bazooka out of her pocket. He knew she was right. He knew he was bluffing, trying to bully the bank into pausing the process, and he knew he had just been outmaneuvered by a woman wearing shoes that were held together with glue. "Mr." Blackwood let out a low, dry chuckle. It was the only sound in the hallway. "Well," Blackwood said, smiling at Henderson, "it seems the homeless woman knows her statutes better than you do. Arthur." He turned his back on them, dismissing them as if they were door-to-door salesmen. "Pauline," Blackwood said, gesturing to the heavy double doors of his office. "Please, come in." "You can't do this," Valerie screamed, her voice cracking. She lunged forward again, but this time, two large security guards who had quietly emerged from the stairwell blocked her path. "Arthur, Do something, speak to him. I looked at my father. He was standing by the elevator, pale and shaking. He looked at me. Then he looked at Valerie. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just faded into the wallpaper, a ghost of a man who had made his choice long ago. Goodbye, Valerie, I said. I walked through the doors. Veronica followed. Mr. Blackwood entered last, and with a definitive, heavy thud, he closed the doors, locking out the screaming, the lies, and the past. The office was a sanctuary. It was a vast room lined with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm orange glow on the Persian rug. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. Sit, Blackwood said, pointing to the leather chairs opposite the desk. I sat down. My legs were trembling, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. We were inside. We had made it. Blackwood walked around the desk and sat in his high-backed chair. He didn't speak immediately. He opened a humidor, took out a cigar, looked at it, and then put it back. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me with eyes that were sharp, blue, and incredibly kind. You look like your grandfather, he said softly, especially around the eyes. He had that same look when he was about to blow up a mountain. I feel like I just blew up a mountain, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. You did, Blackwood agreed. You blew up the mountain that was crushing you, and I have been waiting for this day for 5 years. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file folder. It was sealed with red wax, the old-fashioned way. Silas, your grandfather didn't trust Arthur, Blackwood said, tapping the file. He loved him, but he didn't trust him. Arthur was weak, and Silas knew that weak men are easily led by dangerous women. That is why he set up the trust the way he did. It wasn't just to save taxes. It was to build a fortress around you. He broke the wax seal. The sound was a sharp crack in the quiet room. This, he said, sliding a stack of documents toward me, is the transfer of control instrument. It requires 3 signatures, mine, as the custodian, a witness, and yours, as the beneficiary. I picked up the pen he offered. It was a heavy black fountain pen with a gold nib. It felt cold and solid in my hand. Before you sign, Blackwood said, his voice turning serious, you need to understand what happens the moment the ink hits that paper. You become the sole owner of the Marchant Mining Corporation. You become the owner of the estate, the land, and the liquid assets currently held in the family accounts. You gain everything, but you also start a war. Valerie will not stop screaming just because a door is closed. I know, I said. I looked at Veronica. She nodded, her face grim but proud. She tried to kill me, Mr. Blackwood, I said. Last night, they put me in the snow to die so they could keep this. Blackwood's face darkened. The kindness vanished, replaced by a cold fury. I heard about the incident at the ranger station. Sheriff Miller called me this morning while you were dealing with the intake staff. If I had known earlier. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Sign the papers. Pauline, let us end their reign. I lowered the pen to the paper. My hand shook for a second, then steadied. I wrote my name, Pauline Marchant. The ink flowed dark and permanent. I signed the second page, then the third. With the final stroke, I felt a physical shift in the room. The air seemed to get lighter. The girl who had been kicked out of a Range Rover was gone. The woman sitting in the chair was worth $300 million. Blackwood took the papers back. He signed them quickly, then pushed them to Veronica. Witness, please. Veronica signed with a flourish. It is done, Blackwood declared. He pressed a button on his intercom. Mrs. Higgins, execute Protocol Omega, effective immediately. Protocol Omega, I asked. It is the internal code for a hostile change of management, Blackwood explained with a thin smile. It freezes all subsidiary accounts attached to the main trust. It cancels all power of attorney privileges previously held by Arthur and Valerie Marchant. It locks down the credit cards. the expense accounts, the travel funds, and the household maintenance stipends. He turned his computer monitor so I could see it. It showed a list of accounts, one by one. The status lights next to them turned from green to red. Valerie Marchant, Platinum Visa, locked. Arthur Marchant, stipend account, locked. Household operations, locked. Julian Vance, University Fund, locked. Right now, Blackwood said, watching the screen with satisfaction. Valerie is probably trying to buy a coffee at the cafe downstairs or pay that lawyer of hers, and her card is going to decline. In about 5 minutes, the lights at the mansion will not go out, but the account paying the electric bill will bounce. They are unfunded. They are destitute. They have their own money. Surely, I asked. Valerie spent her settlement from her first husband years ago, Blackwood said, and Arthur never had his own money. He lived off the allowance the trust gave him. They have been bleeding the operational accounts dry to maintain their lifestyle, without the trust. They have nothing but the clothes on their backs and a lot of debt. I looked at the red lights on the screen. It was violent. It was financial decapitation. And it felt like justice. Is that it? I asked. Is it over? Not quite, Blackwood said. He stood up and walked to a large painting of a landscape that hung behind his desk. He reached behind the frame and pressed a hidden latch. The painting swung outward, revealing a steel wall safe. Your grandfather was a paranoid man, Blackwood said, spinning the dial. He believed that people only showed their true colors when there was a lot of money on the table. He was worried that one day, you might be in danger, real danger. The safe clicked open. Blackwood reached inside and pulled out a single, thin manila envelope. It looked old. The edges were yellowed. He placed it on the desk in front of me. He called this the kill switch, Blackwood said. He told me to give it to you only if 2 conditions were met. 1, you had successfully claimed your inheritance, and 2, you had reason to believe your guardians had acted with malice against you. They acted with malice, Veronica said. They acted with lethal intent. I believe you, Blackwood said. Open it. I reached for the envelope. My heart started to hammer again. What could my grandfather have left? A letter. A map. I tore open the seal and slid the contents out. It was not a letter. It was a contract, a legal document, dated 5 years ago, signed by my grandfather, Arthur, and Valerie. I read the title, Conditional Immunity and Liability Agreement. I scanned the legalese, my eyes widening as I understood what I was reading. Veronica leaned in, reading over my shoulder. Her breath caught in a sharp hiss. My God, Veronica whispered. He knew. He absolutely knew who they were. What is it? I asked, looking at Blackwood. It is a clawback clause, Blackwood explained, his voice low and dangerous. When Arthur and Valerie married, and when Arthur insisted on being the trustee, your grandfather made them sign this to get access to the monthly allowance. They didn't read it carefully. They just wanted the cash. He pointed to a paragraph on the second page. It states that if the trustees are ever found to have committed a felony against the beneficiary, not just convicted, but if there is credible evidence of a felony sufficient to launch a civil suit, then they are not only removed from the trust, but they become personally liable for every single cent they spent from the trust during their tenure. I did the math in my head. 5 years of mansions, cars, vacations, jewelry, parties. They spent millions, I said. $12 million, to be exact, Blackwood corrected. And according to this document, which they signed, that money was not a salary, it was a loan that is forgiven only if they turn the trust over to you peacefully and in good faith. If they harm you, the loan is called due, immediately. They owe the estate $12 million, I asked, stunned. They owe you $12 million, Blackwood said, and since they don't have it, you have the right to seize their personal assets. The jewelry Valerie is wearing, yours. The cars, yours. The clothes in their closets, yours. You can strip them down to the bone. Pauline, he slid the document closer to me. This is the nuclear option. You don't have to use it. You can just take the money and walk away. But if you want to make sure they never, ever hurt you again, you enforce this." I looked at the paper. I thought of the cold. I thought of the dark woods. I thought of Julian laughing as he poured water on the stairs. I thought of Valerie's face in the lobby, screaming that I was crazy. They hadn't just tried to kill me. They had tried to erase me. I looked up at Blackwood. I looked at Veronica. "Give me the pen," I said. "Are you sure?" Blackwood asked. "This will destroy them. They will be on the street." "They threw me into a blizzard with nothing," I said, my voice steady and cold as the ice on the ranger station steps. "It is only fair that I return the favor." I took the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed the enforcement order. "Take it all," I said to Blackwood. "Every single dime." Blackwood smiled. It was a wolf's smile. "Done," he said. "Now, let us call the sheriff back. I think he will be very interested to see this new evidence regarding their motive." The war was over, and the slaughter was about to begin. Mr. Blackwood was not finished. The enforcement order I had just signed to seize their assets was devastating. But it was civil. It was about money. And as I stared at the red lights on the monitor, signaling the financial ruin of the people who had raised me, I thought that was the end of it. I thought we had reached the bottom of my grandfather's paranoia and protection. I was wrong. "Mr. Blackwood reached back into the open safe. His hand bypassed the shelves of ledgers and bonds, reaching into a hidden recess at the very back of the steel box. He pulled out a second envelope. This one was not manila. It was black, heavy, and sealed with red wax that had been stamped with the Marchant family crest, a pickaxe, and a mountain. The room went silent. Even Veronica, who had been organizing the signed documents with the efficiency of a machine, stopped and looked up. The atmosphere shifted from a business meeting to something far more ancient and dangerous. "Silas Marchant was a man who understood the nature of predators," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "He told me once that a wolf will chew off its own leg to escape a trap, but it will never stop hunting unless you put it down. He knew Valerie. He knew she was smart, and he knew she was greedy. But he also feared that one day, her greed would turn violent." He placed the black envelope on the mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy thud, as if it contained lead. "He called this the kill switch," Blackwood said. "But in the legal index, it is filed as the heir protection clause. It is a dormant provision in the trust charter, Section 88, subsection C." "What does it do?" I asked. "It changes the mandate of the trust," Blackwood explained. "Normally, the trust exists to grow capital and provide for the beneficiary. But if this clause is triggered, the trust converts into a war chest. It authorizes the unlimited use of estate funds, millions of dollars, Pauline to hire private investigators, forensic specialists, and the most aggressive criminal prosecutors in the country to pursue legal action against any guardian who attempts to harm the heir." He tapped the black envelope. "It doesn't just sue them for money, it pays to put them in prison. It ensures that you do not have to rely on an overworked county prosecutor or a small-town sheriff. It gives you the resources to hunt them down with the best legal team money can buy." He looked at me, his blue eyes intense. "But to activate it, we need more than suspicion. We need proof of a felony committed with the intent to deprive you of your inheritance." I looked at Veronica. She didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag and pulled out the rugged hard drive containing the drone footage and the digital recorder with Arthur's phone call. She placed them on the desk next to the black envelope. "We have the drone footage from 11 o'clock last night," Veronica stated, her voice clipping with professional precision. "It clearly shows Julian Vance dismantling the safety rail and creating a black ice hazard at the specific location Pauline was directed to. That constitutes attempted murder and conspiracy." She pointed to the recorder. "And we have a voice recording of Arthur Marchant from last night, admitting knowledge of the event, attempting to coerce the victim into recanting her statement, and engaging in witness tampering. It establishes a conspiracy between the three of them to eliminate the heir before the transfer of power." Blackwood looked at the devices. He didn't need to watch them again. He had seen the reports. He nodded slowly. "That is sufficient," he said. "The intent is clear. The act was overt. The conspiracy is documented." He slid the black envelope toward me. He handed me the pen again. "If you sign this, Pauline, you are authorizing the bank to liquidate a portion of the portfolio immediately. I will wire a retainer of $500,000 to the firm of Sterling and Associates in Seattle. They are sharks. They specialize in high-profile criminal prosecution assistance. They will arrive in Silver Creek by tonight. They will take the evidence Veronica gathered, and they will build a case that will put Valerie and Julian away for 20 years. I looked at the document. It was a weapon. My grandfather had left me a loaded gun in the form of a contract. He knew, even 5 years ago, that I would be sitting here, alone and scared. He had reached across the grave to put his hand on my shoulder. I thought about the cold. I thought about the feeling of the wind stripping the heat from my body. I thought about the text message Julian sent. I thought of Valerie's face in the lobby, screaming that I was insane. They hadn't just tried to hurt me. They had tried to take my mind, my reputation, and my life. They wanted to erase Pauline Marchant so they could keep buying fur coats and sports cars. "Do it," I said. "This is not a light decision," Blackwood warned. "This is total war. Once I make the call to Seattle, there is no stopping it. The investigation will be ruthless. Every email, every text, every bank transfer they have made in the last 10 years will be scrutinized." "Good," I said. "I want them scrutinized. I want every stone turned over. I want everyone to know exactly who they are." I pressed the pen to the paper. The signature flowed out of me, sharp and angry. Pauline Marchant. "Destroy them," I said, handing the paper back. Blackwood took the document. He didn't smile this time. He looked solemn, like a general accepting an order to launch a strike. "Protocol Omega is active," he said into the intercom. "And activate the clause. Get Sterling on the line." Then he looked at Veronica. "And while we are at it, I believe you mentioned something about an audit." Veronica smiled. It was a terrifying, thin smile. While Pauline was signing the transfer, I took the liberty of cross-referencing the household expense accounts with the receipts Valerie submitted to the trust last year. I found a discrepancy, a significant one. "How significant?" Blackwood asked. $300,000, Veronica said. She claimed it was for structural repairs to the estate roof, but I checked the contractor's license number she listed. It doesn't exist. The money was wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. That is wire fraud and embezzlement, Mr. Blackwood, and unlike attempted murder, which can be hard to prove to a jury, a paper trail of stolen money is absolute. Blackwood pressed the intercom button again. "Get Sheriff Miller on the line. Tell him we have new evidence. Tell him to bring his deputies to the bank. Now." We waited. The minutes ticked by in the silent office, but the energy was electric. We were not hiding anymore. We were the storm. 10 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. "Mr. Blackwood, the sheriff is in the lobby, and Mrs. Marchant is still down there. She is demanding to see the manager." "Let us go down," Blackwood said, standing up. "I think it is time to deliver the bad news in person." We took the elevator down. The descent felt different this time. I wasn't anxious. I felt a cold, heavy certainty. The doors opened on the lobby, and the scene that greeted us was one of chaos. Valerie was standing at the teller counter, screaming. "What do you mean, declined?" she shrieked, slamming her platinum card onto the marble. "Run it again. I am Valerie Marchant. I own this bank." "I am sorry, ma'am," the teller stammered, looking terrified. "The system says the account has been closed by the administrator." "That is impossible," Valerie yelled. She turned to Arthur, who was sitting on a velvet bench, his head in his hands. "Arthur, give me your card. This incompetent girl is trying to humiliate me." Arthur didn't move. He knew, deep down, in the part of him that wasn't completely hollowed out by fear, he knew it was over. "Mrs. Marchant," Sheriff Miller's voice boomed across the lobby. Valerie spun around. She saw the sheriff. Then she saw me, standing by the elevator with Mr. Blackwood and Veronica. She saw the new way I held myself. She saw the files in Veronica's hands. "Sheriff," Valerie cried, trying to rally. "Thank God. Arrest these people. They have stolen my access codes. They have—" "Valerie Marchant," Sheriff Miller interrupted, walking toward her with a pair of handcuffs in his hand. 2 deputies flanked him. "I am placing you under arrest." Valerie froze. Her mouth dropped open. "Excuse me? You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and filing a false police report," Miller recited. "And pending further investigation by the state prosecutor, conspiracy to commit murder." "Murder," Valerie laughed, a high, brittle sound. "You are insane. Who told you that? That crazy girl?" "No," Veronica spoke up, stepping forward. "The ledgers told him, and the $300,000 you wired to the Caymans." Valerie's face went white. The blood drained out of her so fast she looked like a corpse. She looked at Veronica, really looked at her, and realized too late that she wasn't just a homeless woman. She was the executioner. "Arthur!" Valerie screamed as the deputy grabbed her wrist and clicked the cold metal cuff around it. "Arthur, do something! They are hurting me!" Arthur stood up slowly. He looked at his wife, struggling against the deputies, her fur coat slipping off her shoulder. He looked at me. Arthur started, his voice cracking. "Save it, Arthur," I said, my voice carried across the silent lobby. "You don't have any money to bail her out. Your account is closed too." "You can't do this! Pauline!" Valerie screamed, her dignity disintegrating as they dragged her toward the door. "I am your mother. I raised you." "You tried to kill me," I shouted back, the anger finally breaking through the ice. "And now you are going to pay for it every single day of the rest of your life." The doors opened, and the cold wind of Silver Creek rushed in, meeting the warm air of the bank. The deputies hauled Valerie out to the waiting cruiser. Her screams faded as the heavy glass doors swung shut. Then there was silence. The customers were staring, the tellers were frozen, and in the middle of the lobby, Arthur Marchant stood alone. He looked small. He looked old. He was wearing a coat that cost $2,000. But he looked like a beggar. He turned to me, his eyes wet with tears. "Pauline," he whispered, "I didn't want this." "I know," I said, walking past him toward the exit. "You didn't want anything. That was the problem. You just watched." Sheriff Miller stopped in front of Julian, who had been sitting in the corner, trying to make himself invisible. "Stand up, son," Miller said tiredly. "I have a warrant for you too. Attempted murder." The state prosecutor upgraded the charges after seeing the drone footage. Julian didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just slumped, defeated, and held out his hands. I walked out of the bank. The sun was high in the sky now. It was still cold, but the sun felt warm on my face. Veronica walked beside me. "You did it," she said. "We did it," I corrected. I looked back at the bank. Through the glass, I saw my father standing in the middle of the empty lobby. He had no wife. He had no son. He had no daughter. And he had no money. He was a ghost in his own life. I turned away and buttoned my thrift store blazer. It felt better than cashmere. It felt like victory. They say Rome was not built in a day, but they forget to mention how quickly it burned. It took my grandfather 40 years to build the Marchant dynasty. It took Valerie 10 years to rot it from the inside out. But it took me and Veronica exactly 7 days to bulldoze the entire structure into dust. 1 week. That was the duration of the collapse. I sat in the back of a black town car, parked across the street from the estate that had been my prison for 18 years. The engine purred silently. The climate control set to a perfect 70 degrees. Beside me, Veronica was typing on a new tablet, her face illuminated by the blue light of spreadsheets and legal filings. "The sheriff is executing the seizure order now," Veronica said without looking up. "The foreclosure on the mortgage was accelerated because of the fraud investigation. The bank is taking the property back to cover the $12 million they owe the trust." I watched through the tinted window. It was a scene of clinical dismantling. There were no moving trucks. There were no carefully packed boxes. Instead, there were 3 sheriff's cruisers and a white van marked Asset Forfeiture Unit. I saw the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, walking down the driveway carrying a plastic bag of her personal belongings. She looked relieved. We had already ensured that the staff received their back pay and severance from the trust directly, bypassing Valerie's frozen accounts. Mrs. Gable got into her old sedan and drove away without looking back. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. Then, the deputies came out. They weren't carrying furniture. They were carrying evidence, boxes of files, computers. Then they came out with the smaller things, Valerie's jewelry box, Arthur's golf clubs, the paintings from the wall. These weren't being moved to a new home. They were being moved to an auction house. Finally, a deputy walked to the massive wrought iron gates. He looped a heavy steel chain through the bars and clicked a large yellow padlock shut. He slapped a neon orange sticker on the metal property of the U.S. government. No trespassing. The house went dark. For the first time in my life, the lights in the foyer were off. The monster was dead. "It looks smaller," I said. "Ruins always do," Veronica replied. She closed her tablet. "That is the last of the physical assets. Now, let us talk about the human debris." The legal destruction of Valerie Marchant was even more brutal than the physical one. Valerie had always believed that money was a shield that could deflect anything. She believed that if you threw enough cash at a problem, it would disappear. But when she was arraigned on Tuesday, she learned a hard lesson about the American legal system. Justice is expensive. And she was broke. Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer who had sneered at us in the bank lobby, had resigned from her counsel exactly 1 hour after her credit card declined for his retainer. He cited a conflict of interest, but everyone knew it was a conflict of liquidity. So, Valerie Marchant, the woman who used to fly to Paris for haircuts, walked into her bail hearing wearing a bright orange jumpsuit and shackles, represented by a public defender named Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis was a young, overworked man with dark circles under his eyes and a caseload of 300 clients. He had met Valerie 5 minutes before the hearing. I was there in the back row. I wanted her to see me. When the judge set bail at $500,000 cash, citing flight risk and the severity of the attempted murder charges, Valerie turned to Mr. Davis and demanded he fix it. She demanded he call her husband. She demanded he call the governor. Mr. Davis simply shuffled his papers and whispered that, without assets, she was remanded to custody. Valerie looked back at the gallery. She scanned the room for a savior. She looked for her society friends. She looked for the charity board members she had dined with. The benches were empty. The rats had fled the ship long before it went under. Then she saw me. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just sat there in my tailored blazer, my face impassive. She opened her mouth to scream, to curse, to beg, I do not know which. But the bailiff stepped forward, took her by the elbow, and led her through the side door. The door clicked shut with a sound that felt like the final period at the end of a very long, very bad sentence. But the real knife in her back didn't come from me. It came from her son. Julian lasted exactly 48 hours in county jail before he broke. He was a boy who had never faced a consequence in his life. He was used to soft beds, heated seats, and problems that could be solved by his mother's glare. The reality of a 6x8 concrete cell, the noise, the smell, and the terrifying prospect of 20 years in a state penitentiary shattered him completely. The district attorney, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, who had been hired by the Sterling firm to consult on the case, offered him a lifeline. It was a simple deal: plead guilty to reckless endangerment and conspiracy, and testify against the mastermind in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years, with eligibility for parole in 2. Julian didn't just take the deal. He grabbed it with both hands. According to the transcripts Veronica showed me, the interrogation took less than an hour. Julian sat in the metal chair, weeping, and poured out everything. "It wasn't my idea," he had sobbed, his voice cracking on the recording. "Mom told me to do it. She planned it." She told me where to buy the drill so it wouldn't be traced to the house accounts. She told me which window of time to use. She said if I didn't do it, Pauline would take all the money and we would be on the street. She made me do it. He gave them everything. He gave them the text messages she thought she had deleted. He gave them the location of the burner phone she used. He gave them the passwords to her cloud storage where she kept her insurance files. He threw his own mother into the fire to save his skin. It was the ultimate expression of the values Valerie had taught him, self-preservation above all else. She had raised a wolf. And when the winter came, he ate her. While my former family was being dissected by the justice system, I was building a new life. I didn't go back to the estate. I couldn't. That house smelled of lies and cold drafts. Instead, I bought a penthouse in the tallest building in Missoula, about 2 hours away from Silver Creek. It was a fortress of glass and steel. The elevator required a keycard and a fingerprint scan. The lobby had a 24-hour concierge who checked every visitor. It was sterile, modern, and completely devoid of memories. The apartment was 2,000 square feet of safety. It had heated floors, I insisted on that. I never wanted to be cold again. The furniture was white and gray, clean lines and soft fabrics. But the best part of the new life wasn't the apartment. It was my new employee. Veronica no longer lived in a van. I hired her officially as the chief financial officer of the Marchant estate. Her salary was $200,000 a year, plus a generous housing allowance. She had her own suite in the penthouse until she found a place she liked. The transformation was complete. Veronica had shed the layers of homelessness like a snake shedding old skin. She wore sharp pantsuits and silk blouses. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob. She looked like what she had always been, a brilliant, formidable woman who had simply fallen through the cracks of a broken system. We sat at the kitchen island that morning, drinking coffee that cost $30 a pound. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city waking up below us, tiny cars moving like toys. "The portfolio is stabilized," Veronica said, sliding a report across the marble counter. "We liquidated the speculative assets Valerie bought. We reinvested in municipal bonds and the mining operation upgrades. You are solvent, Pauline. In fact, you are richer than you were last week. And the legal bills?" I asked. "Paid in full," she said. "The Sterling firm is happy. They are going to depose Arthur next week." I flinched slightly at the name. It was a reflex I hadn't quite mastered yet. "Arthur," I repeated. "Where is he?" Veronica hesitated. She put down her coffee cup. The sharp professional look softened for a moment, revealing the friend underneath. "Do you really want to know?" she asked. "I need to know," I said. "He is the only loose end." "He is not a loose end," Veronica said gently. "He is a casualty, but the private investigator sent a report this morning." She pulled a photo from her folder and placed it face down on the counter. "He was not arrested," Veronica explained. "Technically, he didn't commit a felony that we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt without a long trial. His witness tampering was clumsy, and the DA decided to focus on Valerie and Julian, so they cut him loose. But the house seized," she reminded me. "And since we froze the accounts and clawed back the assets, he has zero liquidity. He has no credit cards, no cash, no car. The Rover was leased by the company, so we repossessed it." "So where is he?" Veronica turned the photo over. My breath caught in my throat. The picture was grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed a park bench in Pioneer Park, a small public square in downtown Silver Creek. Lying on the bench, curled into a fetal position under a thin, dirty blanket, was a man. He was wearing a suit jacket that was wrinkled and stained. His shoes, Italian leather loafers, were scuffed and muddy. Next to him was a single, battered suitcase. It was Arthur. He looked 20 years older. His face was unshaven, gray with stubble. He looked confused, lost, like a child who had been separated from his parents at a carnival. "He has been sleeping there for 2 nights, Veronica said quietly. "The PI says he tries to go into restaurants to order food, but he gets kicked out because he can't pay. He doesn't know how to use a laundromat. He doesn't know how to apply for a shelter bed. He has never had to do anything for himself in his entire life. I stared at the photo. This was the man who had driven the car. This was the man who had turned up the heat to 72 degrees while he drove his daughter to her execution. This was the man who had chosen his wife's comfort over my life. He is waiting, I realized. He is waiting for someone to come and fix it. He thinks this is just a mistake. He thinks Valerie will come, or Henderson will come. No one is coming, Veronica said. He is alone. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pity. Pity implies that the person's suffering doesn't deserve it. It wasn't joy either. I didn't feel happy seeing him like this. It was a cold, hollow sense of balance. The scales had tipped. He threw me into the cold, I whispered, tracing the image of the park bench with my finger. He left me with nothing. He thought I would die, or I would come crawling back. He made his bed, Veronica said. Now he is sleeping on it. He has no survival skills, I said. He won't last a week out there. He has legs, Veronica said, echoing the words Arthur had said to me that night in the car. He can walk. There are shelters. There are soup kitchens. He has to learn. Pauline, just like you had to learn. I pushed the photo away. Leave him, I said. Are you sure? Veronica asked. Yes, I said, standing up and walking to the window. I looked out at the horizon, where the mountains rose white and majestic against the blue sky. The same mountains that had almost killed me. He had 18 years to be a father, I said, my voice steady. He chose to be a puppet. I cut the strings. Veronica, I am not going to pick them up again. I turned back to her. Send the report to the file. I have a meeting with the mining engineers at 10 o'clock. Veronica smiled. It was a proud smile. Yes, Ms. Marchant. The family was gone. The mansion was empty. The predators were in cages. And the man who had watched it all happen was freezing on a park bench, learning for the first time what winter truly felt like. I was safe. I was warm. But as I drank my coffee, I knew that a part of me was still out there in the snow. The part that used to believe in unconditional love. That girl was dead, and the woman who replaced her had a business to run. 3 weeks had passed since the gates of the Marchant estate were chained shut. The city of Missoula was deep in the grip of February, the kind of winter month that tests the soul of anyone living in Montana, but for the first time in 18 years. I did not feel the cold. I was sitting in the living room of my new penthouse, watching the snow fall against the floor-to-ceiling glass. It was a beautiful sight when you were separated from it by triple-paned windows and a central heating system set to a steady 74 degrees. The fire in the gas hearth was flickering with a cozy, golden light, casting long shadows across the white oak floors. Veronica was in the kitchen, humming a tune I did not recognize. She was chopping vegetables for a stew. The smell of rosemary, red wine, and slow-cooked beef filled the air, a scent that was the definition of home. Sitting at the island with her was Sarah, the young associate attorney from the Sterling firm who had helped us dismantle Valerie's defenses. They were laughing about something, the sound of clinking wine glasses ringing out like wind chimes. Then, the intercom buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the warmth. I walked to the wall panel and pressed the button. Yes. Ms. Marchant, the concierge's voice came through, polite but hesitant. There is a man down here to see you. He claims to be your father. I told him he is not on the list, but he is refusing to leave. He is causing a scene. I stared at the panel. I had known this moment would come. I had felt it approaching like a low-pressure front. Arthur Marchant had run out of pride, run out of hope, and most importantly, run out of warm places to sleep. Send him up, I said. Are you sure, ma'am? The concierge asked. He looks disheveled. I am sure, I said. Send him up, but do not let him pass the elevator vestibule. I turned back to the room. Veronica had stopped chopping. She was looking at me, her knife hovering over a carrot. Sarah had put down her wine glass. Do you want us to come with you? Veronica asked. No, I said, smoothing the lapel of my silk blouse. I need to do this alone. I walked to the front door of the apartment. It was a heavy, solid wood door with a digital lock. I opened it and stepped out into the small private hallway that separated my home from the elevator. The elevator machinery whirred. The numbers climbed. Then, with a soft ding, the doors slid open. The man who stepped out was a stranger. I had expected him to look bad, but I was not prepared for the reality of what 3 weeks on the streets of a Montana winter does to a man who has never boiled an egg. Arthur Marchant looked like he had aged 20 years. His hair, once silver and perfectly groomed, was long, greasy, and matted against his skull. His face was gaunt, the skin gray and windburned, covered in a patchy, white stubble. He was wearing the same suit he had worn the day the bank seized his assets. But it was ruined now. The knees were stained with mud. The collar was black with grime. He smelled of stale sweat, unwashed clothes, and the distinct, sharp odor of cheap whiskey. He stepped out of the elevator, clutching a plastic bag that contained all his worldly possessions. He looked around the hallway, his eyes darting nervously, before they landed on me. "Pauline," he croaked. His voice was a rasp, a broken thing. I stood in the open doorway of my apartment. The light and warmth from inside spilled out around me, creating a halo that he could see but not touch. I crossed my arms. "Hello? Arthur?" I said. He flinched at the name. He took a step toward me, reaching out a hand that was shaking and covered in dirt. "Pauline, please," he begged. "Don't call me that. I am your dad. I am your father." "My father died a long time ago," I said calmly. "I am not sure who you are, but you look like a trespasser." "I am not a trespasser," he whimpered, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "I am family. Pauline, look at me. I am dying out there. It is 10 degrees tonight. I have been sleeping in the park. I have been eating out of garbage cans behind the diner. Mr. Arthur Marchant." "You are not Arthur Marchant anymore," I said. "Arthur Marchant was a wealthy trustee who lived in a mansion. You are just a man who made a series of very poor investments, the worst one being your wife." He fell to his knees. It was a theatrical, desperate motion, the collapse of a man who had no dignity left to lose. "She made me do it," he cried, looking up at me with wet, pleading eyes. "You know how she is. Pauline, she is a witch. She controlled everything. I was scared of her. I was a victim too. She threatened to leave me. She threatened to take the money. I did it to protect us." "To protect you," I corrected. "You did it to protect your golf club membership and your heated seats. You watched her destroy me for 18 years. Arthur, you watched her send me away. You watched her medicate me, and then, on my birthday, you watched her throw me out of a car into a blizzard. I came back," he lied. "I wanted to come back, but she wouldn't let me." "You didn't come back," I said. "I waited. I stood in that snow and I waited for the taillights to turn around. They never did." "I am sorry," he sobbed, crawling forward a few inches. "I am so sorry, baby. Please, just let me in, just for tonight. I am so hungry. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Just a bowl of soup, a shower. Please, I am your flesh and blood." I looked down at him. I remembered the man who had taught me to ride a bike. I remembered the man who used to read me bedtime stories before Valerie moved in. I looked for him in the wreck on the floor, but he wasn't there. There was only a coward who had sold his daughter for comfort. I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't anger. The anger had burned out weeks ago. It was pity, but it was the cold, distant pity you feel for an animal that has been hit by a car. "I cannot let you in, Arthur," I said. "This is my home, and I only allow family inside. You resigned from that position when you drove away." "Don't do this," he wailed. "You can't leave me on the street. I will freeze to death. Is that what you want? You want to kill your own father." "No," I said. "I don't want to kill you. I am not Valerie. I can't solve my problems with murder." I reached into the pocket of my silk trousers. My fingers closed around the cold metal object I had been carrying for days, waiting for this moment. "I have something for you," I said. Arthur looked up, hope flashing in his eyes. He probably thought it was money, a roll of cash, a credit card, anything to buy him another day of the life he used to have. I held out my hand. He reached out and took the object. He stared at it in his dirty palm. It was a single, brass key. It was old, tarnished, and heavy. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "It is the key to the old ranger station," I said. He froze. He looked up at me, his mouth opening in shock. "I bought the land from the Forest Service last week," I explained, my voice steady and conversational. "It is private property now, my property, and since you are homeless, and I am not cruel, I am offering you a place to stay." He stared at the key as if it were a poisonous snake. "The station," he whispered. "But it is in the middle of nowhere. It is a ruin." "Not anymore," I said. "I sent a crew up there. They fixed the roof. They installed a new wood stove. There is a stack of firewood outside, and a few cans of beans in the cupboard. It is dry. It is safe from the wind." I leaned against the doorframe, letting the warmth of my apartment wash over my back while the cold air of the elevator shaft hit my face. "It is exactly what you offered me." "Arthur," I said. "Actually, it is better. I fixed the heater. You tried to freeze me to death in that building. I am giving you a chance to live in it." "You expect me to live in the woods?" he gasped. "Like an animal, I am an old man." "You are 55, I said. "You have legs. You can walk. It is a 5-mile hike from the main road. I suggest you start walking now. It gets very cold after midnight." He scrambled to his feet, clutching the key, his face twisting from begging to fury. "You are a monster," he spat. "You are just like her. You are cruel." "No," I said, my voice hardening into diamond. "I am just— You watched me be thrown into a blizzard for 18 years. Dad, you watched me freeze every single day in that house while you sat by the fire. Now, it is your turn to feel the cold. Maybe, in the silence out there, you will finally find the backbone you lost." "Pauline!" he shouted, stepping toward me. I stepped back and grabbed the handle of my heavy oak door. "The lease is for 6 months," I said. "If you survive the winter, come back and see me. Maybe we can talk then. But until then, stay warm." "Pauline, don't you dare close this door, Pauline." I looked at him one last time. I took a mental picture of him not to cherish, but to remember what happens when you choose money over love. "Goodbye, Arthur," I said. I slammed the door. The sound was like a gunshot. Thud. Then came the sharp, definitive click of the deadbolt sliding home. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the wood. I could hear him screaming on the other side. I could hear him pounding on the door with his fists, but the door was solid. The walls were soundproof. Slowly, the pounding stopped. Then, I heard the ding of the elevator. He was gone. He was going to the woods. He would survive, or he wouldn't. It was no longer my burden to carry. I turned around. The living room was glowing. The fire was crackling cheerfully. The smell of the stew was rich and inviting. Veronica looked up from the kitchen. She didn't ask what happened. She knew. She just smiled. A soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Dinner is ready," she said. "Come and sit down. The wine is breathing." "I am coming," I said. I walked into the room. I sat down at the table next to Sarah and Veronica. I picked up my glass of wine. I looked at the 2 women sitting with me, one a former homeless auditor who had saved my life, the other a lawyer who had fought for my future. They weren't blood. They were better. They were the family I had chosen. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like freedom. I looked out the window one last time. The snow was still falling, swirling in the dark, cold night. Somewhere out there, a man was beginning a long walk, but inside, here in the life I had fought for. The air was warm. I smiled. I finally felt warm. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect. And if you enjoyed this journey of justice, please make sure to subscribe to the Sunday Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people.